Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the first of our series of Fireside Chats with our founder. Today's subject is going to be around leveraging big data to build supply chain resilience. And joining us today is one of our trusted partners from Gnosis Freight, Chief Technical Officer Jake Hoffman.
Yep, thank you guys for having me. Glad to be here.
Of course. And from Trademo, our founder and CEO, Shalabh Singhal.
Hey. Hi, Jake. Hi, Nick.
Good to see you as always. And moderating today will be myself, Nick Greiff, and Enterprise Account Executive over here at Trademo. So for the subject of today, we are going to be focusing on, how SaaS companies in particular in the supply chain space are leveraging big data to create solutions to the current challenges of their clients. And for the first question, we're going to put this one over to Shalabh. What would you say are some of the key challenges and disruptions organizations currently face? And how is this impacting their ability to operate effectively?
Interesting question, Nick. So I think, Nick, one of the most important challenge that businesses face today is the lack of visibility into their upstream supply chain. So let me just explain this further. So organizations today which have very limited visibility in where their goods are actually coming from, they're very vulnerable to all the disruptions which are happening around. So just to share a few more examples, as an enterprise buyer or a company, I want to know who are my second or third degree suppliers. In what kind of environmental and social conditions are these goods getting manufactured? Are my suppliers really ready for any kind of adverse supply chain events or geopolitical events? What kind of concentration risk is there in my upstream supply chain? Am I working with any sanctioned parties, right? So we normally observe that businesses are lacking this very crucial visibility into their supply chains. And globally, the environment that we are living in, almost all industries are competing for very limited resources to get their goods to market, right? And if you have any major disruption without any mitigation plan, it could really put your business at risk for weeks or months, right? Just to share an example, which is kind of mostly talked about, is semiconductor shortages. And its impact on the auto industry, specifically talking about US, where more than billions of dollars of revenue got lost due to these shortages. And more recently, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which came into implementation in the US, would have a similar impact on global supply chains. So I think just to sum it up, I believe that visibility is one of the main challenges businesses are facing today, because there were never enough investments made into this particular space.
Yeah, I would certainly concur with you there. And I think anyone that's had a look at the performance of, say, Rivian stock over the past year can certainly see how, weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the supply chain can have a pretty significant effect on the bottom line. Would love to kind of turn that question around, Jake, and kind of get your take on that as well, just to recap the question. Some of the key challenges and disruptions organizations currently face and how this is impacting their ability to effectively operate.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll build on Shalabh's point there. I think that, the visibility upstream is extremely important. It's really challenging for say importers into the United States or anywhere in the Western Hemisphere to have that visibility about where their products are coming from, how, when, Shalabh mentioned geopolitical events, sanctions, when things are changing, with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and some of those other events of things that are happening, how does that affect their supply chain? How do they get visibility to that? And then on top of that, when things are like they are now, when there are all these things in the world that are happening that's making these changes, how, an organization that, once they get visibility to it, right? Once they know what's happening, how do they adjust on the fly? A lot of the supply chains, the way that they've been built for, 20, 30 years now, have been really relying on specific suppliers, specific trade lanes, and everything has just kind of worked, right? No one paid attention to the supply chain 10 years ago because there wasn't these disruptions and the crazy delays, and it wasn't affecting the average American consumer until now, when there's always delays, prices are going up, and everything else. So now the challenge is, hey, we've got some data to identify what's going on. How do we make changes? Can we look for other suppliers? Can we, make sure that the suppliers we do have are currently meeting the agreements that we have? Are they shipping enough on time? Am I allocating enough of my, if I'm doing ocean freight, am I allocating enough of my container contracts to X factory in Vietnam, somebody in Malaysia, and so on? And so it's a challenge where there's so many parties that are operating together and everybody has their own systems, their own ways of doing things. And so when disruptions are thrown into the supply chain like we've seen, it's a challenge to somehow get accurate information from across the board and build that into my plan as an importer or my plan as a supply chain professional to adjust on the fly and make good decisions for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I think, those are some very pointed insights, and just to surmise, supply chain didn't see this coming and was, out of step with changing consumer patterns and just, the vulnerability of, as you mentioned, geopolitical turmoil, natural disasters, industrial action, whatever the causing factor may be. Awesome. Moving forward, Shalabh, how do you think big data and analytics can be leveraged in efforts to, mitigate some of these disruptions that we've identified?
Yeah, Nick, another good question. So I believe big data and analytics today is one of the most important solution to this problem of supply chain visibility, right? There has been a lot of unstructured data lying around, which has never been kind of leveraged to its full potential, which we can actually use for mapping multi-tier global supply chain relationships. Think about trade data coming from customs authorities. Think about a lot of public filings data coming from listed companies. Then there is a lot of trade compliance data, which is kind of again scattered across thousands of authorities globally. We are talking about sanctions being published by, again, thousands of relevant authorities, right? So all of this data is out there, but I think not enough investments or effort has been put into bringing all of this data together on a common forum, on a common platform. And it is very overwhelming for businesses when all these supply chain disruptions are happening, all this kind of dynamic changes to compliances, regulations to make sense of this data. So it requires very strong data engineering, normalization, ML capabilities along with a lot of domain experience to really make sense of this data. But once you bring all of this data and activate this on a common platform, it helps in multiple ways. You can actually diversify your supply chains better, like never before. You can really understand your concentration risk in the supply chains, not just at the tier 1 level, but at the tier 2, tier 3 level, right? Businesses can identify and map, are there any kind of ESG risk? Are there any kind of financial, geopolitical, operational risk in my upstream supply chain? They can be on top of all the trade compliances and also at times leverage opportunities to reduce their cost, to reduce their risk, right? And I think all of this big data analytics cannot be in isolation. Enterprises have been using S2P platforms, like source to pay platforms, ERPs, CRMs, right, for their supply chain workflow ecosystems. So all of this data really needs to integrate with these platforms so that the right insight is available at the right stage of the supply chain process. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Excellent. So valuable insights as always there. And I guess, Jake, following on from that, do you feel that there is enough awareness amongst supply chain professionals to, the data-driven solutions that are available on the market today?
I think we talk about data a lot in the supply chain space, and there's it comes in many different forms. You guys have talked about the granular trade data. At Gnosis we look at transit times and containers and how the import cycle, export cycle in the United States and other locations, how all that comes together and what that looks like. I think for a lot of supply chain professionals in the industry, giving them a lot of data, giving them more data doesn't necessarily fit what they're used to. It doesn't fit into their ERP system. If we give them a better ETA and that updates their ERP system, like that's great. But the stuff that really matters to them is, all this data. So what does that mean? And that's where, to Shalabh's point, taking that information and putting insights on top of it, charts, graphics, analytics to take what all that data is and how that actually affects them. Right. So not just visibility, right? Visibility is a big buzzword, and we've already spoken on that today, but visibility plus what else can we do with this visibility? What can we take, say, transit times are increasing to LA Long Beach because of all the vessels that are out there. Okay. So what does that mean? We're not just going to say, okay, well, we're not going to go to LA Long Beach anymore because maybe your supply chain depends on it. Maybe you have a warehouse there, right? There's other options. And so just giving data to a lot of people, I think supply chain professionals get inundated with data all the time, and they're probably a bit overwhelmed with it. The tools that really make a difference are the ones that can take that data, but actually do something for them, do the work of the analytics and things on top of that data to give them the power to make decisions and make changes, prioritize, identify exceptions, and all the above. And I think that that's something that may be lacking in awareness for things like that, and also just solutions in the market. There's a lot of data, and we're getting better and better at finding solutions and things that not only just give you a bunch of information, but actually give you some insights on what to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, everyone would agree that there is, no shortage of data. What really happens is, in moving the needle forward, is being able to separate that noise, find the actionable data, and then very quickly, put that to work to help you, with whatever challenges you may be facing. So again, some great insights, guys. We'll keep things moving along with the next one, going over to Shalabh. Where would you say are some of the critical breakdowns in the current supply chain infrastructure, and how do you think global trade data can be leveraged to help remedy these?
Yeah. I mean, before I answer this question, I think I completely agree with Jake's point that today supply chain professionals are really overwhelmed with the amount of data, but it's really about bringing those deep insights from that data and putting them at the right place at the right stage of the supply chain process, right? And similarly, talking about the critical breakdown in the current supply chain infrastructure, I think that there are three major critical breakdowns, the way I would like to put it. First one is the labor shortages, right? Which I think is a global phenomena now. And I have my own theory of why there is this sudden kind of labor shortage problem, which has been there for a while, but I think COVID just really escalated this issue. So first one is, I think, like, the reason for labor shortages could be that there is some kind amount of negative perception about this industry, due to which a lot of people who have been into the industry are kind of retiring, but the young generation is not really keen on joining this industry. And then there are regulations to operate in this industry, even like for the people involved as labor in this industry, right? And then the other major factor, I believe, is that there is very limited participation of women in the industry, right? So if you look at these stats, like, this is one of the industries which has lowest representation of women, right? So these are the things which are kind of couldn't be fixed immediately, but I think there is a realization globally on how steps should be taken up, and governments all over the world, including United States, is taking adequate steps to fix this. I think the second major critical breakdown is the lack of available equipment, containers, and a lot of other equipments which are really required to make these supply chains functions. And I think one of the reasons there is the kind of trade imbalance we have on major trade routes, right? So think about China, Long Beach, China, Los Angeles. So most of the trade is kind of one-sided, which is not very effective utilization of the containers coming on these ports. So again, I think those are the kind of reasons that people are not talking more actively about in the supply chain community. And I think there are smart solutions being developed to address those challenges. And I think the third major critical breakdown is the impact of any kind of global bottlenecks, right? So a port closing down in China, I think, would have ripple effects around the world, right? So now, with respect to your second question, like how global trade data can really help in mitigating some of these challenges. So I think the global trade data really helps you stay on top of these changes, stay on top of different trade routes, what's happening at different ports, what's happening with major VOCCs and VOCCs out there, right? And understand the trade imbalance trends, understand how the volume of trade is shifting across different trade routes, right? So a lot of companies, including shippers, including logistic companies, can use this insight to allocate their resources better across different trade routes, right? We have seen that logistic companies have used this trade data to identify a particular set of companies where they believe they can provide better logistic services compared to some of their competitors, because they have some specific capabilities around those trade routes or product categories. So this is the point of like there is a lot of data around, but can you really make it insightful for these companies to address some of these challenges? And I think we have seen, so we see huge promise in using trade data, even from the supply chain infrastructure issues standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to concur with your evaluation, your assessment there. I think, a big lesson that's been learned from all this disruption is the need to be proactive rather than reactive. There's not that luxury to see how things are going to pan out anymore. And particularly with, every single industry being affected by this, that's just, exacerbating the squeeze on these already strained resources. So yeah, it's definitely things for us to think about as an industry as we move forward, and seek to bolster ourselves for the future. Turn the mic over to Jake. What would you say, are some of the challenges you've seen for, customers that are looking to integrate a data-driven solution with their current workflow, or some of the business intelligence tools that they may be using?
Sure. I think that, being in this industry for the few years and seeing some of the disruptions and things that are out there and causing issues, the normal operating procedure that we see across the board with our customers, with people we talk to all the time, the normal operating procedure for any supply chain professional, importer, exporter, anybody is Excel, right? Their entire, their MO is, hey, I'm going to get a spreadsheet from my freight forwarder, from my factory, and I'm going to maybe update my ERP system with this data. But most of the time they're going to get the spreadsheet, and it's going to be, this is the normal way that they do things. They're used to tabular data with, maybe a container number, a purchase order number, POL, POD, the normal data points. The problem with that, and what we see, is the second that you get an Excel sheet that's dumped from somewhere, the second that Excel sheet is created, that data is immediately old, right? Because any of the data that updates, if an ETA updates, if a container moves, if you have an air shipment and that the ETA changes, there's a flight delay, any of that stuff, any of that that's happening in real time in the real world, that Excel sheet is just a snapshot of it. And it gets immediately, it's it's old. Some of the information's old. And so, how do you get away from that? The challenges that a lot of our customers see with getting away from that is that's what they're used to. And then if you decide that you want to undertake, hey, we want this awesome visibility platform, or we want to work with this new company, whatever it is, the onboarding process and the management of change, right? Of how do we go from getting all these different spreadsheets to having a platform that everything's updated in real time and all that. The problem we see with that is it's a big undertaking, right? There's partners you have to integrate with. Like I mentioned earlier, a supply chain is not just one company buying from another. There's the factory, the truckers, the freight forwarders, the ocean carriers themselves, U.S. Customs, and everybody that's all a part of the supply chain. In order for all that to work properly for the end customer, you need collaboration from everybody, right? And so how do you get collaboration to get data from point A, point B, point C, all the way to point Z to put it into something that you could actually do stuff with? That's a big problem we see in the industry and onboarding and getting that stuff working. And that's why, we try at Gnosis to do a good job of not relying so much on the other parties out there, but getting our own data connections, right? Our own data sources, our own track and trace data, our own flexible methodology for working with people, right? And, a lot of people can send an email with a CSV file attached. Not everybody can send you an API webhook with perfect data every time, right? If that was true, if everyone in the world had an API, it would probably be a lot easier place to do trade. And eventually I hope that happens. But right now, coming up with flexible ways to get information passed back and forth is something that we do because we see a huge problem in getting connected across the board.
Excellent. It seems like, you and the team over at Gnosis really put an emphasis on doing as much of that heavy lifting as you can internally to make it easier on your clients. But I think as an industry, if we're going to change, there are kind of really two factors that need to be addressed. There is, that human factor. Just because something has always been done that way doesn't mean it's the most efficient, as, we are learning. And then, as you said, with all these different parties that are fragmented, making sure there is, one singular source to, collateralize and centralize all this data so it can be actioned. So yeah, great insights as always there. We've kind of touched upon this a little bit in some of our other questions, but I do think it still, bears mentioning. And this one for Shalabh. Given the current geopolitical events that we're looking at and the significance of the impact they've had on supply chains and their resiliencies, how do you see companies leveraging, solutions such as trade mode to, mitigate these obstacles in the future and continue on their growth trajectories?
So, Nick, I believe, first of all, these geopolitical events are big problems for any kind of supply chain, right? So first of all, I would like to kind of empathize with all the supply chain professionals out there, logistic companies out there who are dealing with the amount of this geopolitical events which have happened in last 2 years. So it's not just the typical wars, conflicts that we have seen, but also kind of rising tensions between some major economies in the world, right? Which normally almost always all of such kind of geopolitical events lead to a lot of changes. This could be changes in tariffs, this could be kind of some kind of non-tariffs barriers, this could be sanctions, countervailing duties, anti-dumping duties, and so on, right? And businesses who have planned their supply chains for decades, right, they really get disrupted overnight with these changes. So I think we are living in a very difficult world, and it again kind of stresses upon this point that the way you plan your supply chains needs to be much more thorough and should factor in different kind of risks which could come into the future, right? Because there are always going to be some kind of unpredictable events. So diversification is definitely the key. Now, with respect to how we have seen businesses kind of leveraging platforms like Trademo or other solutions to kind of mitigate some of these challenges, right? So I think the first thing is you have to stay on top of what's really happening and what are the kind of changes which are happening with respect to regulatory compliances and due to all these geopolitical events. Sometimes businesses are not aware because they do not have any regular feed or insight coming into the immediate impact of these geopolitical events, and they can be at a regulatory risk themselves, right? Second is, once you are aware of what has happened and how it kind of impacts your regulatory kind of compliances, it's about understanding the true impact of these changes, right? Just to give an example, if we have a Russia-Ukraine conflict, is my supply chain only getting impacted if I have any suppliers in Russia? But I think that's not the case. Those Russian suppliers, those Ukrainian suppliers, actually are part of the complex supply chain network globally, right? So even if you do not have anything to do with Russia or Ukraine, your supply chains can still get impacted a lot. So just discovering those multi-tier dependencies and how some of those raw materials inputs are going to impact my supply chain is important, and also understanding how some of these changes are going to impact the commercial viability of the way I have designed or planned my supply chains, right? So trade data, compliance data, the sanctions data, it can really help you understand the impact in totality rather than just to one first degree or so on, right? And the third is, once you have understood the impact, then you can actually take the right kind of mitigation steps to address some of these risks, right? And again, it's about finding alternate suppliers. It's about finding other trade agreements that I can leverage. It's about finding different locations where I can source my goods from. So those are all the things which kind of, I think, can, where data can help, but still I think it's a huge challenge, and it requires a lot of effort, thinking, investment from enterprises to deal with them.
That's, yeah, very, very comprehensive overview there. And I think a lot of people would not have, thought that far ahead to say that, even if I'm not necessarily sourcing directly from Ukraine or Russia, how this may impact my business on a wider scale. And last question of the day goes over to Jake. What do you think would, entice stakeholders in the supply chain industry to foster a more collaborative environment around data sharing in the hopes of creating greater transparency and visibility into the landscape of global trade?
Yeah, interesting question. And quickly, just on what Shalabh said, I totally agree on the diversification, and using something like Trademo to evaluate suppliers in different regions, see some, what some other people are doing, where are people moving supplies from, or suppliers to? Is it moving from China to Vietnam? We've seen some of that recently. Is it moving different places in Asia, right? And I think that's important. And it's, to what we've spoken about a ton today, the resiliency of your supply chain. That's a buzzword that everybody's using, and trying to be able to diversify the same way you diversify your stock portfolio, in the same way that you're trying to work with different suppliers around everywhere, so that one black swan event in one country, one geopolitical event, anything that happens doesn't totally disrupt your supply chain. As far as the question, how do we bring data sharing, bring that ethos more to our industry and make it more visible and transparent to people? I think one thing that's important is to make it easier, at least, for people to do so. I don't think that it used to be, maybe years ago, whenever people wanted to protect their own data and they were really hesitant to share with the outside world on the way that they're doing things. But I think there is a more collaborative approach to supply chain, to importing, exporting, moving containers, moving air freight, moving things around the world, where everyone's seeing the same pains and they're just looking to each other to kind of look at, how can we get that fixed? Something that I meant to mention earlier when you asked me about some of the difficulties in making adjustments in digital adoption and digital data-driven transformation. is something that we forget. We're in software, so if we want to make an update to our system, we email our users and say, hey, we're going to have downtime, right? We're going to have downtime on this software, and it's going to be a couple hours. It's going to be at 3 a.m. your time. You're never going to notice it. Supply chains don't have that, right? When I'm moving things around the world and I have suppliers, the factories are doing this, and we're moving containers around the world, there's no break where I can decide to cut everything off and then switch. That doesn't work for my company. So when you're looking at data-driven transformation and digital adoption for all the different players in the space, for us to do that as a supply chain organization, I say us as an importer, exporter, supply chain professional, it's like changing a tire on a car going 80 miles an hour down an interstate, right? It's tough to do. You don't have time to just sit there and play around with data because you're busy making goods move. You're busy filling consumers' demands, getting orders to your customers, giving your company a better bottom line by making sure that supply chain runs smoothly. So I think, the biggest thing is just to make it easier for everybody in this environment to share data, to work with each other, and not make it such a pain to do so, to have to conform to some central data standard and hire a lot of people to do all this. The easier we can make it for people, the better it'll be, the more collaboration we'll have, and the more transparency to the industry that we'll have overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with you more on that front.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think it's easier said than done. I think we'll continue to see changes and things. There's a lot of push out there for digital adoption and standardization and things. And I hope that a lot of these initiatives make things happen. That maybe there's I don't know if it's a government requirement. The FMC has a lot of things in the United States they're trying to do to help importers, help exporters, and so on. But we'll see how all that plays out. But as we continue to move forward, I think just making things easier, doing things in a better way would be beneficial for everybody, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jake's point that there are huge challenges, and I think whatever has happened in the last couple of years has somewhere increased the kind of adoption or for new supply chain technologies, new data intelligence products among the supply chain community. But I think there is still they really need to move from working on Excels and coming out of that comfort zone, and how they can actually integrate all of this intelligence into the right system. So there is still some path to go, but I think we are in the right direction.
Awesome. Onwards and upwards, one day at a time. Cool. So, that covers our agenda today. Again, we'd like to thank our valued partner, Jake Hoffman, for participating and the invaluable insights that he has provided for us today. If you or your organization has been affected by any of the issues we've raised in today's fireside chat, or you are looking for a trusted partner to assist with container lifecycle management or highly granular transactional trade data, please reach out to us via one of the links below, and we'll be more than happy to assist you. Goodbye for now, and stay tuned for the next installment. All the best.